said in the bathroom and stuff, but they said that if we hadn't got her up in time, Brother, that she died right there, because her muscles broke down, everything broke down, but I just thank the Lord for moving on her, I just thank the Lord. Tonight, what we're going to sort of teach on, and it's sort of awkward, I'd say, but, this is what the Lord laid on my heart, it says, blessed by your enemies. You mean you can be, Brother Jacob, you can be blessed by your enemies? A lot of people think, hey, my enemies is something that, how can I be blessed by them? It says we all know that God can bless us, right? We know that God can send blessings and to us and stuff. He can show us favor. He can promote us. He can also heal us. Through all this, God can do anything He wants to do. But we don't always realize that God can use our enemies to bless us with. You mean God can use our enemies? Just like at times that we get to teach and stuff, that when we go through trials and tribulations, they ought to be our joy, Brother James. It says, Paul says to rejoice when we go through tribulations. That sounds, Sister Brenda, that sounds sort of odd. How can we be happy when we go through trials and stuff? How can we be happy when God uses our enemies to bless us with? Let's see what it says. And sometimes, you may think it is a bad thing when a person walks away from us. How many times do we feel like that? How many times is when we're young, Brother Jacob, that maybe that we've got a girlfriend or maybe a boyfriend, and they walk away from us or something, that we get to think, God, what happened? But we don't realize that maybe God is setting us up for something. That maybe, Brother Taylor, God is setting us up to move us higher. Maybe them people that walked away from us, maybe they're hindering us. And God sees that. We don't see it, but God sees it. Maybe they're hindering us. So God moves along. In other words, He says, you may not like it, but you can't reach your destination without it. It's all part of God's plans to get you to where you're supposed to be. David would only be a shepherd boy if it wasn't for Goliath. If it wasn't for Goliath, he'd stayed as a shepherd boy. He wouldn't have moved up. In other words, Goliath was placed in David's path, not to defeat him, but to promote him. Without Goliath, David would never been king. So don't complain about your enemies. Don't complain about them. It may look like a setback, but really it's a setup for God to get you to your throne. Sometimes we don't realize that, Brother Jack. Sometimes when we look, we can't see that. We think, God, I can't do nothing. I can't do this, and I can't do that. We think everybody that comes along may be our friend. But sometimes they may be your setback. In other words, all God could have done with David, He could have used Saul to promote David. Saul had authority. The Lord could have moved on Saul's heart and told him, hey, go ahead and promote this young boy. But God chose to bless David, not through his friends. He didn't choose to bless him like that. What did He do? But through the enemies that. Why? We don't have to play up the people to try to convince them to even to like us. Because they ain't going to like us, Brother Taylor. Everybody ain't going to like us. Sometimes we think we can buddy up with them, but maybe they're a hindrance to us. So in other words, we don't have to buddy up to them, in other words. When David defeated Goliath, you never hear any more about Goliath. He's out of the picture now because God used Goliath to promote David. Where Goliath was created for David's purpose. Part of his destiny was to establish who David was, just as God has a divine connection lined up for you. People to encourage you, push you forward. He also lined up people that will try to try to stop you if they can. There's people out there, there's all kinds of people, Brother Jacob. There's good people, bad people, people that will try to stop us. What? Why? They will discourage you. They'll try to make you look bad. There are lies ordained to come across your path just to stop you. Just to try to defeat you. You don't understand why until you get discouraged. And then ask God, why is this happening to me? Do we ever ask that? God, why did these people do me like this? That opposition wasn't meant to stop you. It wasn't meant to stop you. It was to level you up. To level you up to your destiny. But everyone around you will see that the favor of God is on your life. Sister Linda, I've heard Brother Jacob testify, the lady maybe at work that she was having trouble with. Maybe she meant to make you look bad. Maybe she'd go and make you look. But some way she was just setting you up for your destination. Maybe she's setting you up for a higher step. Like I say, we don't understand. No word, but everyone around you will see that the favor of God is on your life. Sometimes that will put an enemy in your life to keep you, what? Stirred up. Have you ever heard what they call setting at Zion? What's setting at Zion, Brother Jacob? That's sometimes with your hands folded down, setting at ease. I've always told, and I've told the story many a time, when I was going to church, I didn't take and do anything wrong. I got saved. I got started church when I was about 19 years old. But there was something, Brother Taylor, that was in my life that I was setting at ease. I was setting at Zion. That setting at Zion, like I say, is at ease. Maybe you come to church every Sunday. Maybe you that you sing, you participate. But God sometimes is wanting to move you out. Wanting to make you push you a little further. There was something that came in my life that was pushing me. You know why? Because he's wanting to pray to you. Sometimes, as I've always said, sometimes we can go and ask somebody, Sister Lindsay, will you pray for me? Brother Jacob, will you pray for me? That's like coming over. If I went over every day and send Cindy over to borrow eggs or milk from Brother Jacob or Sister Lindsay, sometimes they might look at them and say, Sister Cindy, we don't care really to give it to you, but why don't Brother God ever come and ask us? That's the same way God wants us. He don't always want Sister Lindsay, Brother Jacob, and Sister Cindy, and always to pray for. He wants you to pray to him. And that is why he pushes us sometimes. Sometimes the things that comes in our life, maybe things that came upon me, is to push me, to show me that God will move for me. Yes. Just exactly like he'll move for you. And that's the reason that sometimes, that's the reason he does it. In other words, he says to stir you up. He allows critics. No, Jacob, you ain't gonna never make nothing. But why does people do like doubters? Brother Jacob, I doubt if you'll ever make anything. Brother Gene, I doubt if you'll ever make a Sunday school teacher. But you know why? You know why we do that? Is to push you. And the more that I push you, more that I may set off and criticize, more that it makes you want to say, yeah, I'm going to show them I'm going to make something. So in other words, it's the doubters, the discouragers, even some haters. So when you feel tired and think you'll give up, you'll keep pressing forward. Have you ever seen anybody say, well, it's the devil. The devil. Oh, I know the devil's in there. But he said, in other words, that's the reason he sends the enemy to you, is to press you, to make you go further. So even haters, so when you feel tired, you think that you can give up, you'll keep pressing forward, shaking it off, not because you feel like it, but because you don't want to give your enemies the joy of sin you in defeat. Don't let him see you in defeat. You know what? Psalms 23:5, you know what it says? Thou preparest a table before me in the what? In the presence of my friends, people that loves me, people that really cares about me, people that won't talk about me, Brother Jacob, people that won't put me down. But what's it say? It says, thou preparest me a table. You mean, Lord, right in front of my enemies, you going to put the table? Wouldn't it be best? He said, thou knowest my head was full, my cup runneth over. Sometimes we want to be like Naaman. We want to deal with clean water. Sometimes, Lord, it's best if you'll just go ahead and put my table, Brother Jim, right in front of my friends. Don't put my table with my enemies. But what's he saying? He said, thou preparest the table before me in the presence, in the midst of my enemies. Notice when God brings you through an opposition, he's not going to do it in private. He ain't going to just let you sit back. He's not going to do it with all those, with the enemies that can't see it. He's going to show your enemies that, hey, I lifted her up. I brought her up. I brought her on higher ground. You might have put her down. You might have talked bad about them. You might have said they never make it. But what can I do? What can I do? He said, in other words, he's going to do it where all your enemies can see it. Maybe you're facing some kind of enemy. It's just not a person. It ain't just persons all the time. It can be your enemy, maybe in your health. God says, hey, you're never going to get over this. The enemy says you're never going to get over. In your finances, it can be in a relationship, as I've said before. Maybe it's somebody that you really thought that loved you, maybe somebody that you cared about, but they just walked away. God said, no, they're hindering you. They're hindering you. You need to move them on. Hey, I've got something better for you. So in other words, it doesn't look like it's ever going to work out. Lord, is this going to ever work out for me? Am I going to have to go through this? But in other words, he says, maybe it's going to work out. But have this new perspective right now. It says God is preparing the table. He's preparing the table for us. In other words, so right now, you know what, if we look, the angels are taking the food out of the oven right now. Maybe Gabriel is putting the finished touches on the meal. And at any moment, you're going to hear the Lord, the dinner bell ring. And God's going to say to you, it's your time. It's your time, Brother Jacob, to come out of this. It's your time that I'm going to fix to level you up. So in other words, here's the table. Here's the meal that I prepared for you. And it's just not a little fast food meal hidden over in the corner where nobody can notice it. No, God is preparing a table like he did for David to where not just all your friends see it, but even your enemies. Because he said, I'm going to prepare a table before your enemies where they can even see what I'm doing for you, where I can get the glory, where I can lift you up. In other words, the doubters, the discouragers, the ones that said you couldn't do it, they're going to see you blessed, promoted, vindicated, living your dreams in a place of honor and influence you. So in other words, God's going to lift us up. In one sense, God is going to do what he says he's going to do. And Mark 2, 3 through 9 says, and they came to him, bringing one sick of the palsy. One was born of 4. And when they could not come nigh to him for the press, they uncovered the roof where he was laying. And when they had broken it up, they let down a bed wherein the sick of the palsy lay. When Jesus saw their faith, he said unto the sick of the palsy, Son, thy sins be forgiven thee. But there were, what? Certain other scribes sitting there and reading it in their hearts. Why doeth this man thus speak blasphemy? Now here's his enemies. What did he do? He healed a man right in front of his enemies. He said, this man speaks blasphemy. Who can forgive sins but God only? This man can't do this, Brother Jacob. Did they not set off and criticize him? Did they not sit back and say, hey, this man can't do this? Brother Taylor, you can't do this. Brother Taylor ain't going to ever make nothing. Of course, God going to do. I said, oh, yes, he is. He's going to make something. Maybe Brother Rod might not see it. Maybe I don't think so. God said, oh, yes, he is. And immediately when Jesus perceived in his spirit that they so reason within themselves, he said unto them, why reason ye this thing in your hearts? Why do you say this stuff? Whether it's easier to say to the sick of the palsy, thy sins be forgiven thee, or to say, arise and take up thy bed and walk. But that you may know that the Son of Man hath the power on earth to forgive sin. He said it to the sick of a palsy. And immediately he arose, took up the bed, and went forth before them all. And so much that they were all amazed and glorified God, saying, we never saw it on this fashion. So I'm sure those people, when they saw him standing there, they nearly passed out. Because at this point, if they had been murmuring and complaining, criticizing this man, may not have been healed. If they hadn't been murmuring and complaining, maybe Jesus couldn't heal them. Jesus could have forgiven the sins and moved on. But because of their murmuring, Jesus healed the man. So when people are talking about you, trying to make you look bad, pushing you down, don't worry. Don't worry about it. Because you know why? God hears them. They are putting you in position for God to bless you in a greater way.
That's right. Amen.
That's all they're doing. All they're doing every time they speak, Jimmy, they're just setting you up.
Yeah.
They're just saying, hey, he can't do it. But you know you can. God says you can. In other words, they are putting you in position for God to bless you in a greater way. You don't have to straighten them out. Don't fight the battles that don't matter. Stay in peace, and like with a man, God will use your enemies to bless you. Some of the favor that you're seeing, some of the good breaks you have had, it didn't happen because of you. It happened because of those people that's trying to stop you. They put you in position and they tried to promote you. That's all they do is to set you up. In other words, Matthew 24 and 44 said, the Lord said unto my Lord, sit thou on my right hand till I make thy footstool, thy enemies thy footstool. So in other words, he's going to make your enemies thy footstool. That means anything that comes against you, persecutions, the trials, the disappointments, if you'll stay in the faith instead of being a stumbling block to take you down, God will use as a stepping stone to take you higher. The enemy will come against you in your thoughts. He'll tell you things like you'll never forget. Nowhere. Well-bred additions, accomplishments, your dreams, you'll be too small. You don't have to take what he's throwing at you. You can rebuke him. You can tell him, no, the Lord said. The Bible says, if the Lord be for you, who can be against you? No, nothing can come against you. Philippians 1 and 28 said, in nothing terrified by your adversaries, which to them an evident token of perdition, but to you a salvation and that of God. But don't be intimidated by what somebody says. Don't let that intimidate you. God knows what you're going to be. How many of us would really take, and if we could look at Paul, how many of us would really think Paul would ever amount to anything? If it was left up to me, the way he was persecuting the church, I'd probably say, Paul, God won't never use you. You persecuted the church. What about Peter? We'd say the same thing about Peter. Peter denied him, but he used him. In other words, he said, somebody said, negative medical reports, you'll never make it. You and God are majority. And when Jesus came out of the grave, he took the keys of death and hell and said, all power has been given to me in heaven and in earth. Now, what? I am giving you that same power. You are not weak. You are not lacking. You are full of what I can do in the Scriptures. So if we look and just say, Lord, I can do it. Exodus 1 and 9 through 11 said, and he said unto his people, behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply. And it came to pass that when there falleth out any war, they join also unto our enemies and fought against us. And so get them up out of the land. Therefore they did set over them taskmaster to afflict them with their burdens, and they built for Pharaoh treasure city. What's it? And I can't say that word. In other words, Exodus 1 and 12 said, but the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew, and they were grieved because of the children of Israel. The more because they knew. Pharaoh thought that he was stopping them, but in fact, he was increasing. He just made them mightier. Sometimes when God wants to promote you, he doesn't send you a good bread. He sends you an enemy. He'll cause someone to turn, but he makes things more difficult. But don't worry. The more opposition, the more you're going to increase. So in other words, just keep the faith. Psalms 119, 71 said, it is good, what, for me that I have been, what, afflicted. That they come against me. Maybe that I was sitting amongst my enemy, that I might learn thy statutes. If David were here, he would tell you that it was good that Goliath showed up. You know why? Sister Linda, that just made him level up there. In other words, it says Jesus would have said it was good that Judas betrayed me. It may have been uncomfortable at the time, but one day you'll say, this enemy didn't defeat me. The enemy promoted me. If we stay in the faith, God has our back. Luke 22 and 31 says, and the Lord said, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan hath desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat. But what happened to Peter? If you want to come back to the music, this is my last scripture. What happened to Peter whenever he said that? He said, but I have prayed thee that thy faith fail me not, and when thou art converted, strengthen thy brother. Matthew 16 to 19 says, and I will give unto thee the keys of the kingdom of heaven. That's what he done to Peter. When the devil thought he had Peter, the Lord told him, I will give you the keys to the kingdom. And whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. And whatsoever thou shalt loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. But you know, Brother Wayne, next time that we got an enemy, next time that we think if the enemy's going to defeat us, maybe next time that somebody says something bad about us, if we can just look at them, maybe Sister Lindsay can pat them on the back and says, you know what, you might think I'm hard, but I think, Lord, you have just leveled me up. You have just Gene, maybe you thought you was putting me down, but all you done is leveled me up to where God can use me. So next time that your enemy says something, just